And now we welcome Mr. Andrew Forrest, founder of Walk Free Foundation, in studio to talk about us with it. And sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Going to the root of a problem, how do you see modern slavery, sex slavery? How do you see that?
Well, there's sex slavery, which is obviously not voluntary prostitution. It's when people are forced into sexual slavery at the point of a gun or a knife or coercion threats. That's actually a smaller part of slavery in all over the world and in Indonesia. The biggest part of slavery in Indonesia, and Indonesia, I have to say, is doing a terrific job. They're helping lead this whole region out of slavery, but the biggest rump of slavery here, like there is in the rest of the world, is in forced labour, bonded, inherited debt and the like.
As you know, Indonesia has a lot of migrant workers employed around Southeast Asia and around the world. Now, how does that correlate with forced labour, and how do you see the root of the problem?
Well, it correlates very closely. When the Indonesian government passed a law in 2015 to protect its domestic workers from travelling to certain countries where they have had so many reports of abuse and slave-like practices, they moved in a very public fashion to say slavery does exist, Indonesians are in danger of it, and we must protect Indonesians.
Now, how about voluntary versus involuntary? We know that debt bondage, as you know, a lot of fishermen, we found a lot of fishermen in the sea. That is more on forced labor, is that correct?
That is forced labour. That's where people from Indonesia or Manila or from Tanzania, any countries you can think of, get brought into the fishing industry. They get promised jobs, they get promised work, but when they're here, their passports get taken away and they're forced onto boats, and without that passport, as soon as you overstay your visa in Indonesia, then of course, like every country, you become an illegal, and then you're caught, and that's when you can spend months or years with no pay, no contact, no access to the outside world on fishing boats. And the Indonesian government, again, it's famous all over the world, has taken a strong stand against slavery and fishing.
Now, how does Walk Free Foundation try to combat this whole situation right now?
Okay, so in a number of ways. Firstly, by making sure that the people of Indonesia appreciate that their laws, even their religious teachings, declare that their rights to freedom are exactly the same, no matter how low down the pecking order they are for education or economic growth. Australian or Indonesian people have the same rights to freedom as the Prime Minister or the President of Indonesia. That message is getting across Indonesia very fast. It's a wonderful message. It's great for the people of Indonesia. And tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the Vice Presidential Palace, it will be led by the Vice President and the faith leaders of this great country.
On the faith leaders, how do you see their role in sort of executing this whole action?
Well, you have a massive country. You have the largest Islamic faith group in the world. You're the fourth largest country in the world. You've got 13,000 islands, hugely complex, wonderful population of people. We've got to reach all those people. They've all got to know that they have the same rights to freedom as the president of their country. So a great way to get that message out to the grassroots of the people and impact the people at the very top is through a united faith leader action. It's worked around the world, it's worked in India, and I am certain it will be even more powerful here in Indonesia.
How about that versus social media? We know there's a lot of millennials nowadays. Are they more effective that way because of the situation in Asia and Southeast Asia?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, millennials, social media, they are playing a huge role in the freedom of people. I mean, I'm in debt to that younger generation to encourage people like me and leaders, business leaders across the world, political leaders across the world, to get off our backsides and make sure that they don't inherit a world which we inherited, which has the largest number of modern slaves at any time in human history exists now. And we can fix it with those millennials, with social media and the religious leaders supporting the political leaders, with the people supporting the businesses and companies and politics to end slavery. It'll happen in Indonesia, it'll happen around the world. And there's a very important initiative by Indonesia and Australia which will bring together, for the first time in the history of modern slavery, a massive intergovernmental international business meeting in August, and it's called the Bali Process Government and Business Forum. That will bring us all together and lay out a blueprint to end slavery in this huge region. And we have 60% of the world's population living in our Indo-Pacific region. We have 70% of the world's slaves suffer here. we end slavery in the Indo-Pacific, we're going to end slavery around the world. And Indonesia and the people of Indonesia can play a major part.
You did mention that business leaders are also going to be involved, and it affects their business as well. Tell us how that happens and how it relates to their business.
Okay, so the Bali process is a joint venture between Indonesia and Australia, and it got going in 2002 through the great leadership of both governments. And ever since that time, in its 15th year now, it's been evolving. Now, the Bali process has seen the biggest human crisis, the biggest challenge facing the world now is modern slavery. You've got twice the population of Australia trapped in modern slave-like conditions, 46 million people. So they've said, we need a process to bring all the governments of the Indo-Pacific region, all 46 of us, together. But governments alone can do very little, just like business alone can do very little. But bring government and business together and have that supported by the people through the faith leaders, through social media, through the transparency of proper research, measuring slavery for the first time, and we create an ability to have the most powerful forces of management in the world, politics and business, working together to end slavery.
This is very much in the early stages. What's been done in the past and what's lacking?
Okay, so I don't think it's that early. I mean, you've allowed me, you've welcomed me in front of your magnificent audience to talk about modern slavery. Only 3 years ago, no one would have known what that was. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been allowed to use the word. Now, in Indonesia, I'm totally safe declaring modern slavery for what it is. The forced removal of freedom from people like you and me, where we're treated like farm animals, and we can never leave, not on our own volition. Yeah. So the world's really moved, Indonesia's really moved, and the fact we can even talk about it means we can measure it, means we can fix it.
There's still some kind of taboo going on.
It used to be a taboo. It used to be an absolute taboo. You couldn't raise the term modern slavery in many parts of the world. In India, it wasn't even in the language. It was brought into the language. Here in Indonesia, there's still sensitivity around the word, but you have faith, religious leaders, and you have brave leaders in your government who are prepared to face up and say, the world has a problem, Indonesia shares that problem, and Indonesia can help lead our part of the world out of this.
Tell us about the highlights again on what's happening tomorrow with the Vice President of Kala and the religious leaders. What do you hope to tell us the highlights tomorrow?
Well, I believe the Vice President is a brave and wonderful man. When he heard that all the faith leaders of Indonesia were coming together and they're about to make a major declaration, exact copy of the declaration made by the global faith leaders, the Grand Imam of the Al-Azhar, the Pope Francis of Rome, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the big leaders of the faiths all over the world came together for the first time, and they were inspiring the faith leaders, the 6 major religions of Indonesia to come together. And he knows what modern slavery is, he knows the world suffered slavery, and he knew there's slavery in Indonesia. He said, I invite you to have this meeting in my vice presidential palace. And that really gives the anti-slavery cause a huge leap forward, because it means government is working with faith leaders, is working with the people, and will encourage business to share the same value that every Indonesian has the same right to freedom as the president of Indonesia. Now,
let's say someone does know about something going on in an area. What's the first cause of action a normal citizen, a normal resident should do?
Okay,
I think I'm quite clueless.
It's a great question. You know, in Indonesia for a long while, really didn't think it had any terrorist issues, and then Bali bombing occurred, and the Indonesian government has led the Indonesian people to say, if you watch, and you see something suspicious, report it. Exactly the same with forced labour, bonded debt, forced prostitution, any of these practices where human freedom is taken away by force, report it to the authorities. That will help stamp it out in Indonesia when the people know that they have the same rights and other people report a severe freedom removal injustice, then I can tell you the people who are doing the enslavement get very concerned. Get that going in Indonesia, and getting the Indonesian people, when they go shopping, or even when they go to work, say to the boss, do we have any forced labour in our supply chains? Or when they go to the supermarket, Are any of these goods, any of this seafood, any of these clothes, has this been made, do you think, or do you know, by forced labour? The answer to that question becomes very important, and the fact you ask the question becomes very powerful.
You're a very successful person, billionaire, very successful in the mining industry. What made the move? Why?
Well, got dragged there. Look, I've known about slavery since I was about 19, but it wasn't until my daughter went to Nepal and worked in an orphanage. And yes, we do have that wealth, so I wanted to cover her with intelligence and what she was doing with right information to know she would be safe. And in that process, we discovered that there was a child trafficking ring operating in Nepal up through India and into the Middle East, where these children were being dreadfully abused, and if they ever came back, they didn't come back like little children. They came back scarred, really mentally damaged. And this is, of course, the worst travesty you can do to a child. That forced sexual arrangement is really terrible. I then discovered that, you know, when I came on the journey to become a major modern slavery activist myself personally, maybe I should look in my own supply chains. Maybe I should look in my own company. My company is a $20 billion company, has 3,000 suppliers. Maybe my hands might not be clean. And when I looked hard at my own supply chains, my hands were not clean. I found slavery in my supply chains, really bad slavery, where Indonesians themselves were being held against their will in factories in the UAE with East Indians, with Malays, with Thais, all over this region, forced labour, making products for me, making products for companies all over the world.
Definitely.
And I went and fixed it. I stopped it.
All right, Mr. Forrest, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with everything tomorrow.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.